Things are not going well. Just lack of just anything going right tonight. This coffee does not taste like coffee. Like all I want in life is just to get a cup of coffee and pick it up and take a sip and have it taste like coffee flavored fucking coffee. I'm sitting here trying to add a little sugar, add a little more coffee. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this. I think it's just a bastard brew situation. Just something's wrong with this pot from its inception, and it needs to move on to its next life before it can make amends, and then all will be well with the universe. But for now, I guess I'll just have to endure it. and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Easy Reefers Fish Room of Science. Today we are following up on a little series because I just got a comment from somebody that to me obviously indicates that maybe my point wasn't quite conveyed as to the whole reason for the series, or at least the totality of it. Like many of my videos, the subject line will say one thing, and I'll have a few sentences about that, but then I'll be covering a whole different slew of related subject matter. That's country? You call that country? I wouldn't call it country. That's just two stoners with a drum machine. That's all that is. Anyway. Apparently, my music's too country for some people. It's a very dark series of music that me and that guy created. Usually just by rolling up a joint and hitting record on a sound blaster. 16-bit audio? Actually, no, I think we were using the 64-bit Odyssey at the time. It was a long time ago. Anyways. So, what was I talking about? That's too country. I never really thought of that song as country, but like I can't deny it now that you've said it. It's like, well, it's got the fucking harmonica and the acoustic guitar. It's really just supposed to be like folk music, I guess, but anyway. I guess you have to hear the other music to understand why that's like the happy, lucid, weird song, you know? Okay. Anyways, you know, every weird band has that one little happy sounding song. That's the one little happy sounding song. I guess that's what throws me off about calling that country. Anyways, but like I said, that was just cakewalk. Fucking hit record, make up some words. He was good at making up words. I was good at making up guitar lines, and kind of half-assed programming drum machines. But we do a lot of different music from, 20 years ago when I actually used to record it. So, don't judge until you've heard more. But for now, I want to get back to this Anemone series that was spurned off of a few either ill-timed or misbegotten altogether purchases. Yeah, you remember Cakewalk? Do you remember the Ecstasy? Sorry, we got to get off the fucking audio stuff. I had that external sound blaster thing that was like supposed to be all cool. I had a fucking microphone that I bought specifically for it. I missed that setup. I would still use that to Cubase. Oh, dude. How about Cube Basic? Cartridge. Okay, cartridge. The first programming I learned was on a fucking cartridge. Anyway. But yeah, the reason why I was on the previous edition of this channel the first person to start the whole Russian collusion thing was because I was an IT guy since the fucking, at least professionally since the late 90s. Anyways. But I was definitely a computer geek and a fish geek since the 80s, which is some reason why I have this channel. Having not so much expertise, but at least a lot of different anecdotal experience that is worth sharing. So anyways, as far as things that I think I've had enough of experience to develop some actual expertise in, Anemones, I would say, are one of them. In particular, even though I waited until 10 years ago out of 30 to finally get a bubble tip anemone, mostly because rose bubbles were out of my price range. I was always interested in the cheap bargain, Never did I realize. And let me just say this outright. Let me say two things outright before I begin in all the different comparative analyses. One, a regular old rose bubble anemone is the only anemone that a beginner has any business getting unless you have a professional level maintenance schedule going on a 120 gallon or larger fish tank. Okay? Again, unless you have a 120 or bigger, maintained the same way somebody who came to your house once a week and you paid them money to maintain it would maintain it. You could pay them to maintain it, or you could maintain it at that level yourself. You have no business getting any other anemone except for a regular rose bubble tip anemone. Don't get the half-priced green bubble tip anemone thinking it's pretty much the same. It's not. Okay? Now, the other thing I'd like to point out is the secret to keeping anemones is acclimation. Okay? No matter what the anemone is. But, that being said, you can't acclimate an anemone to a bowl of Cheerios by adding one Cheerio at a time. Here's a little bit of milk for you, and we'll just slowly get you used to the milk and Cheerios. No, it doesn't work that way. Again, with the Cheerios reference, because I just have this box sitting underneath my table, and I saw the news about the bug spray, and I've just been eating it slower since then. Is it making me sick? Anyways. So let's begin with rose bubbles. First, let me give you a better view of mine, if I might. Taking off the regular view screen there so we can all see. And I've got one back peeking out from behind the rocks back there, and you'll see the clownfish go back there occasionally. And I've got this guy, of course, right here, the main one. This is actually the newer of the two, which has been doing quite well. And as you can see, this is a broodstock tank for 2 true perculas. I've raised about 140 babies to their first past metamorphosis on this, and delivered over 100 of them to local pet stores. And I've got a pretty extensive little setup here if you haven't seen it on other videos. This is one out of 4 tanks connected to this system, totaling about 140 gallons. And first of all, let me just say this. To keep a rose bubble long term, to keep any anemone long term, I recommend at least 40 gallons of water. You have better kept an anemone in a 60 gallon or bigger before you attempt that, just like you better attempt a 20 or 40 gallon before you attempt one of those nano setups and putting a rose bubble in there. You really need to understand the stability required for anemones to stay happy and not stressed out. Now, that being said, what matters, and I'm assuming a certain level of experience, and I'm assuming that people who watch this video are going to get beginner information off the internet, or have at least experienced this for themselves, or read about it a little bit. So forgive me if I use some terms that most people wouldn't understand. And I'd like to I'd like to be discussing things more with people who know as much as I do, or possibly more about the hobby in general. But suffice to say, I have trouble making blocked out beginner type content because I don't write down what I say on these videos. Every one of my videos is pretty much off the cuff. Sometimes I'll have a notebook where I have a couple of talking points. But other than that, I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. So bear with me. Alright. So, no matter what size tank you have, no matter what lighting you have, no matter what within a degree of acceptability your water condition is, the key to keeping the appropriate anemone in that system, and that's first of all what you have to do is determine which anemone is appropriate for you to be keeping to begin with. But to keep that anemone, whatever it is, in whatever system, you need to focus long-term and short-term on acclimation. There's a short-term acclimation for an anemone, and there's a long-term acclimation for the anemone. Now, the short-term is going to be irregardless, and you're going to have to do it on any anemone in any setup. But the long-term acclimation of your anemone basically depends on, well, how long it is, how extreme it is, depends on how similar your setup is to where that anemone came from. Now, again, when buying an anemone to begin with, there's a couple of important things to consider. One is, how good is your setup really? How deep is your water? How deep is the river if you cannot see the bottom? No. How deep is your water? How far away is your light from where you're planning on putting the anemone? Are you planning on getting a different type of anemone than a rose bubble? If so, do you have a sand bed with a nice big rock that a sibe can get itself into? Do you have a nice clean area where a long tentacle can bury its base all the way onto the glass on the bottom of your sand and spread its tentacles out and really get to that metal halide? Do you have metal halide? If you don't have metal halide, you better have a serious rig, or else you're not going to be able to keep a long tentacle anemone to begin with. Ritterize. Do you have a giant rock sitting in the middle of your tank, right there where the light is, with 12 inches above it, that the ritterite can stretch out and get all the light it can possibly get? And for all those anemones, are your water conditions always perfect all the time? Do you have automatic top-off, not like a rigged setup like I have? If you have a rigged setup like I have, or if you're sitting there dripping manually, with a Zoom Ed dripper or whatever, if you have one of those computer-controlled setups, if you pay somebody else to maintain your stuff, and it's one of them recommended setups these days, very modern, very good equipment exists nowadays, you can keep these anemones as long as you plan for it. And the other thing that you need to keep in mind in these ideal situations is the sourcing of the anemone. Okay? Now, you have your basic inspection methods. Okay? What you want to find is a dark, richly colored anemone. Do not fall for this rainbow anemone crap. Do not fall for this super hyper-colored, bright pink shit. If you find these light colored anemones, they're not that healthy. They're bleached. There's a lot of different things that I suspect that they do to lead to these different colorations, but chances are you're not going to be able to continue to replicate these conditions long term. And if you can't replicate those conditions long term, the anemone's not going to stay looking like that. And it's going to be a bit more in depth than it just not looking like that. It's going to be not healthy, because the way the anemone looks is actually directly related to the health of the anemone. Because what determines the way the anemone looks is the zooxanthellae inside. Now, let me try to be a little bit beginner friendly here. Zooxanthellae is the microscopic, well, semi-microscopic, single-celled algae that grow inside of all photosynthetic corals, giving them their vibrant colors and giving them their ability to produce energy for themselves. Your anemone needs this zooxanthellae to produce energy for itself. Hold up. I just... Really, Vancouver, BC. Let me just get this up right quick. I have to document something right quick because of the ongoing bullshit that I must endure. In Russian. Isn't that wonderful? Anyways. So, see if I can remember what the hell I was saying. Yeah, zooxanthellae, blah, blah, blah. Clear. Okay. Putting the phone away because the memory's full and I can't take a photo of my screen anyway. But oh well, you know, I'm beating a dead horse at this point. Speaking of dead horses, my freaking TV's off. Oh no. My TV malfunctions and it takes a bit to turn it back on, so I try not to let it turn off, and apparently I've let it turn off. Anyways, back to the freaking zooxanthellae. So your basic health inspection is going to tell you a lot about where those anemones came from. Okay? Chances are, if it's all, that's not surprised, dear. You see, because I tell the truth about things, not on this subject, this is obviously innocuous, but because I'm not one of these concerted morons who preach nonsense, and I actually speak real truth and mention things that these people seem to want to distract you from, on this previous, the previous edition of this channel and my new channel known as the Lost Begotten channel. Being the first one to point out what was going to happen in 2016 and who was involved, and to have done so in 2014 has made me a target of certain people who you wouldn't think I would be a target of. You know, it's supposed to be an American corporation, right? That's all I'm saying. But for some reason I've been trying to be a conspiracy debunker who basically points out the other country involved here, and that other country had been spreading all of those conspiracies. That's for the Lost Begotten channel. Feel free to look that up. I've privatized the well over 2,000 videos that were on this channel because it is my monetized channel, and if I make them public, my revenue goes down even though my views go up. Thanks, YouTube. But anyways, so back to the fucking zooxanthellae. Back to the task at hand. Perfection is perfection, so I'm gonna let them understand. From a young reefers perspective. Wait, what? Did I just Snoop Dogg parody for Reef Geeks? I'm not even sure how I feel about that. Anyways. It's the capitalist, yes, press double B, D-O double G, Y, D-O double G, you see. Showing much flex when it's time to wreck a mic. Pipping them hoes and clock on a grip like my name was Dolomite. Yeah. Well, that didn't work. Yeah, anyway. I try to be entertaining. I really do. I try. So, one fucking cigarette left in this pack. Oh, you rotten bastard. 1 second, please. Gotta cough up my lung. Okay. So, back to the anemone thing. Before we get too off track. And I get, and I toss it over to Dr. Dre. I mean, wait, what? No. Or I show you what a lame white boy I really am. You probably can't spell or it won't pop up. Oh, are you being suppressed? I'm sorry, dear. I don't know why the hell YouTube doesn't like me unless they're just, on the side of the Russians instead of the side of America. That's all I can fucking figure. But they tend to pick and choose who gets to comment. They tend to pick and choose who gets to view. I'm very happy you guys could join us if you are real people. I'm kind of traumatized at this point to where I don't even believe that you are real people at more than a percentage level. Everything's about percentages with me as far as making determinations of what is reality. But that's because for years I have been reporting on a particular subject and have been, let's see, I can put it into monetary realization for you. Once the real quote-unquote collusion started, and I had been basically proven right, when somebody's making an outrageous claim, it's easy to ignore them until they get proven right? Well, I wasn't fucking claiming I had invented the question mark or anything. I was claiming that a foreign country was interfering with our psychological perceptions of the world here on YouTube. On the internet in general, people who were seeking esoteric or conspiratorial truths were being channeled into an anti-government psychosis based upon a complete deletion of the awareness of the other country involved. And I'm not going to say the name of that other country because then the monetization on this video will go from green to orange. Because again, YouTube seems to have very suspicious allegiances. But anyways, for me it all started by supporting Ukraine. I started supporting Ukraine and I saw what the fuckery was really about. And I would love to openly discuss this with y'all later. I'm going to be resuming another broadcast after this, and I'm going to get off this subject now, but you can find me on the Lost Begotten channel, and we'll proceed from there. Anyway. So, about anemone acclimation. Okay, let's get down to understanding why you have to acclimate. Okay, when you see that anemone that's really dark brown and rich and lovely, it probably hasn't been out of the ocean for long. If it was aquaculture, if it's been in a holding facility for any length of time, it's been under intense metal halide lighting. And that's why it's got kind of a brownish color when it's under the whitish light, and then it gets like a different mix of greens and orange and reds when actually, the actinics start to ramp down and you start to get that pretty glowy color over your tank that my webcam isn't picking up what the fuck right now. At least zoom in on this one guy for you. Something very relaxing about watching a pair of mated clownfish and an anemone, like, sleeping peacefully, you know, like they've been together for years. They don't fight anymore, you know. He knows his place. Ball anemones, but I don't have much experience with ball anemones. I've never even heard of them. Ball anemones? I'm trying to think if I've even encountered like a video or something about a ball. I can think of a couple things they might call a ball anemone. Is there an actual species name for that? Anyways, I'm trying to stick more to beginning things here, and the basic, you know, retail common. If that's something that's trending and becoming aquaculture, that's, you know, that's something I need to learn about. But I really don't recommend, and I kind of actively hate on people who want to acquire anything rare other than for breeding purposes. Okay, I'm an aquaculturalist. I breed fish and I breed mollusks, and, you know, I grow fucking coral out, and I'm trying to open up my own little self-sustaining fish stores. Strawberry anemones. Again, like, it's cross-referencing a couple of things. I'm like, can you call that a strawberry? But you got me, man. I feel old, you know. Either I missed something or I'm just out of date, man. But I apologize. But as far as what I think most people should be keeping in their tanks, you should stick to what we can grow and have multiply in our tanks. You know, there's a lot of these yellow-tip ritterized for the people who really want to be ambitious and have very established, you know, well-running systems. You can get split, not wild-caught ritterized now. Sea bays, I really don't recommend a sea bay because of how many fucking go to waste. They are pushed because they're easily harvested, and most of the ones that get sold, I think, probably die. Most people will wind up not even knowing where to place them. Even if they have okay tank parameters, that sea bay is going to die if it doesn't have right where it wants to sit, just ready for it. And the reason being is because it's a relatively sensitive anemone. And while it might be able to find its new home and change from one location to the next in the wild, where it hasn't experienced a drastic change in temperatures and salinities and water conditions, and, you know, it's got all these other things stressing it out when it gets moved into your tank. So then to expect it to find for itself the base of a rock with some nice soft pliable sand, no, man. What you really want to do when you get a sea bay anemone is, if you don't have a place like by the rock where there's some sand that you can clear out without the rock toppling over, that it can also get to plenty, and I mean plenty of light. Nothing's going to grow out and block the light from it. Okay? You want to go ahead and place it like a long tentacle, which is find the middle of a well-lit sandy area. If you have a sandy area that's growing algae in an otherwise pristine tank, good thing to do. Put an anemone or, you know, some kind of coral right there, right? Keep the freaking algae from growing right there. But A long tentacle or a sea babe will do well if you dig that sand all the way down to where the glass is exposed. Okay? And if you get that base on the glass, especially like, I really recommend like taking your thumb and cleaning the film off the glass. Okay? I mean, really, really get it as clean as you fucking can. And have your water get cloudy or whatever while your anemone's still drip acclimating. 3 hours later it's going to be cleared up, right? And if you stir your sand regularly, it shouldn't be that freaking cloudy, should it? No, it shouldn't. But if you get the base of the anemone attached to the glass, one of the reasons why they do so well when they're in those nice clean glass tanks is because you're eliminating stress factors. And one of those stress factors you're eliminating by getting that glass clean is bacteria. Okay? When an anemone can attach to nice clean glass, its immune system doesn't have to activate and fight off the bacteria and create mucus that kills the it doesn't have to do all that extra work to clean the glass. It's going to clean the glass over time itself, but that's going to compromise its immune system. Well, not compromise it, but put it to work elsewhere. The more different places you have your immune system working, the more likely you are to get sick, right? So if you've got a bunch of different additional factors stressing an anemone out, and you can remove one by with your thumb, go ahead and do it. Now, as far as rose bubbles, a rose bubble being, I'm telling you, if you're a beginner, or even if you're an experienced person who doesn't feel like you've had luck with anemones, or you have maybe one anemone in your tank and it's doing okay, but you want to see an anemone do really well, a rose bubble is so worth the investment. Now, you can find them at saltwaterfish.com for, I think, around $70, $80. The B grades are what I recommend. I think they go on sale for like $50. They're small. You're going to need to feed it like twice a week. To get it to grow out, I got it to where I was feeding it every other day. And once I had completed my lighting acclimation, I don't need to feed it but once a week, maybe 2 weeks. Okay, just enough to keep it like vitamins, basically. Its main sustenance has become the lighting. But you can't just expect to put a shrimp in an anemone's tentacles once a freaking month or something like that and think that it's going to get all the different complex proteins and nutrients that it needs to keep its stinging cells alive and to keep as full health as it can. You want to slowly acclimate the anemone onto your lighting and onto the food that you have by offering it multiple types of foods. The best way is with Rod's food, or one of those mixed bleeder beds. There's a Hikari makes a frozen one. There's this other company, maybe one of you guys can think of it. It's one that's in most of your local fish stores. But I'm so focused on Rod's food, and I've talked to him extensively on the phone. Back when I was first starting out breeding, he gave me a lot of good advice. So I say Rod's food because he's a cool guy and I support him. And I won't ever buy anything but Rod's food because it's clean as hell. When you can find a food that's just that clean, and it's got mollusks and mussels and oysters and clams and shrimp and salmon and rotifers and squid legs, and it's got so much stuff in it, and you mix it up in your little bowl. Like I have LED strip lights, so I can just put my little culture on there, put some tank water in there, put it on top of one of the lights, and it'll warm up in no time. And I'll take my little syringe guy and take the big chunks off the bottom, feed that to the anemone, and all the little chunks go into the water, and the clownfish stay busy with that so they're not messing with the food that the anemone's eating. And the anemone gets to eat a variety of different things. And I have yet to have an anemone pass up anything from a fresh bag of rods food, because it's just so palatable to the anemone. Everything that comes, you get the breeder's blend, has all the extra meats in it. But you got a happy anemone when it's eating its veggies. Oh yeah. So anyway, now back to the strict acclimation process side of things. Okay. When you first bring home your anemone, bear in mind, if it's at the local fish store, really, what a time, what a time for the broadcast to go red. A fifth person just joined, and then the broadcast goes red. Thank you, fifth person. Probably that Russian back on another account. Oh, damn it, I said the word. And they're gone. So we'll give it a second. And when the bar goes red, when the bar goes green, I will proceed. And we are talking about the actual... Oh, there we go. We're back to green. And we're going to get back to the acclimation from the beginning. Okay, so we've picked out our anemone. We've chosen where it needs to be put. We've researched where that anemone wants to go on the rock. What type of lighting, how much lighting it wants. Okay. And then we come across this rose bubble tip, immense quadricolor, Entasmia quadricolor, Emancipation Proclamation quadricolor, whatever it's called. And people just says they're easy, just put them in your tank, they're fine. They're all the same. No, they're not. They're not at all the same. There are primarily 3 different types of rose bubbles, of bubble tip anemones that get marketed. The green, and the green with the pink base, and the rose bubble. Okay. The only one for beginners is the rose bubble. The green bubble tip will require much lower nitrate and phosphate contents. And for some reason, they like really intense lighting, but to be far away from it. They are an anemone that likes a lower depth. Okay? And the conditions to keep a green bubble tip happy are very difficult. And then your red base green bubble is going to be kind of the same thing. It's going to like to stay higher in the water, but it's actually going to be even more sensitive to water changing conditions. The slightest change in salinity is just going to piss it off. But your rose bubble, they've been known to live in some relatively hostile environments. Some warm water, some tidal areas. They tolerate, entire point changes in salinity over the course of a day, every day. No problem. If you have a manual top-off regime, this is the only anemone you can get. Except for one of them weird tide pool cold water anemones. I'm sure they would do fine, but then you'd have to wear in cold water, wouldn't you? Anyway. So, when you get whatever anemone it is you have, you want to take a sample of that. Like, I keep a refractometer and a regular salinity meter. When I'm doing my regular maintenance, I just use the regular meter. But when I get new livestock in, that's the time when you need a small sample size to tell you what the salinity is. Okay? Based on the salinity of that water, you need to determine how long the acclimation will be. If it's 1 point off or less, 3 hours. That's right. If it's that close, 3 hours. where it can kind of see the stream goes. If only the stream could stay running for more than a few minutes. I have no other devices on in this entire... If I can find my cell phone. Where the hell is my cell phone? Oh, there it is. Oh, and it's red again. Goody. Goody fucking gumdrops. Airplane mode. I'm flicking off the red line, not the fish. Fuck you, red line. Fuck you. Piss off, you cunt. You know, for most things, a cunt isn't a good insult to use, unless it has a cunt. If you call something with a cunt, then it's not an insult to cunts. But most things that don't have a cunt, if you call them a cunt, you're kind of insulting cunts. Because let's face it, cunts are kind of nice. Anyways. So apparently saying cunt a bunch of times brought back the broadcast. There's a song for that, you know. It's been a while since I posted that. It's the Star Wars theme, sung entirely to the word cunt. But I'll spare it. I'll spare you I'll spare you the gloriousness and majesty of that song for the moment. It was I think it was a video I had on MySpace like fucking 15 years ago or something like that. Anyways. So when you're dripping your anemone, you want to have... Oh, there it goes back. If you were a dumb teenager in the... The broadcast just went off and back on again. If you were a dumb teenager in the 90s, long enough... Top tier! Sing the song. Cunt, 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 cunt. Cunt, cunt, cunt. Cunt, 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 cunt. Like, I'm getting bored of this. Maybe we should go with the dark theme. Cunt, 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 cock and balls, cock and balls. I'm back. It doesn't say I'm back. Trying to keep myself entertained here, so I don't just sit here. How does it feel, Sentinels, to work for the machines against humanity? The environment as a policy, causing other nations to want to destroy the environment as a policy. They're welcome to keep fish tanks too, and I'll help you with your anemones, with the best of them. Just red and green, red and green. It's like Christmas. I wonder how Bill O'Reilly would react. Fuck it, we'll do it live. I mean, we can't do it live. Oh, fuck it, we will do it live. I mean, fuck it, we won't do it live. I mean, fuck. Somehow I knew there would be a seventh person. It's like I summoned you or something. Boo. I think I scared him. Allow me to speak. When you're afraid of someone being able to speak, you are asking me to. But I'm just trying to give people advice on how to keep a freaking anemone here. So, bugger off, you little minions. I've got promises to keep. And miles to go before I sleep. So welcome back, everyone. It looks like we have a broadcast going. 8 people watching, supposedly, allegedly. And if I can get to the end of the chat screen without it going red again, I will proceed. Keep your friends close, but your anemones closer. Thank you, Mr. Relic Turtle, or Mr. or Mrs., I'm not sure, for providing me with that perfect fucking segue. Anyways. So, based upon the difference in parameters between you and the online store that you ordered or the local fish store that you... Mr. Turtle, okay. Thank you. I don't want to be sexist by, assuming, all turtle keepers are boys. Because I have a female that's a reptile... I have a female friend that's a reptile breeder. So, she would punch me. Like, she can punch. And she's like my sister, so I couldn't hit her back. I would just sit there and have to let her punch me. She could be a woman. Anyways. Yeah, you're right. He could be a woman too. That's what I used to call it when I was little, was the Emancipia quadricolor anemone. I don't know why Entosmia didn't click, just I don't know. I used to think Eric Clapton said, "Hey love," not Layla. And, whatever. Hey love, you got me on my... come on, man. But I more than make up for that now, because I can actually fucking play the song. Anyways. Good song. So I guess I should just kind of start the fuck over again, since we didn't really make it very far. Once you've established where your anemone is sourced from, you can determine how long you need to drip acclimate it. Okay, but where you need to drip acclimate it is actually very important. You need to drip acclimate it at a point where it can see, at first, just a little bit of your life. You want to have it in a... If it's in a clear container, you want to have all the lights off around it. Okay, all the lights in the room are off around it. And you want to put a little piece of cardboard or a pamphlet or something over the the little drip container. If you have one of the little Lee's specimen containers, that's what I usually use for dripping. I have holes drilled in one so I can have it overflow back into my tank once, or overflow into a drain bucket, depending on how I'm doing it. But that helps too. If you drill holes or cut slots into a lees overflow container, you can have it at first dripping back into your tank, and then, at first dripping back into an overflow bucket, then after 3 hours, just keep it dripping for, just until it looks freaking perfect. Okay? And, I usually recommend keeping anemones in a 2-tier setup, because, again, your top off can stress out an anemone. Okay, so if you're adding your top off to your sump, it's got that extra layer of separation, and it's not going to be stressing out the anemone every day. So you do your acclimation in a specimen container or in some sort of overflow container by your sump. Okay, and that allows for me to say, I'll mix up some fresh salt water in one bucket, put another bucket underneath the specimen container. Okay, allow the specimen container, when I drip my tank water, to overflow into the bucket, fill up the bucket, and get the new water dripping in at the same rate. Okay, so I got the new fresh salt water going in, old salt water coming out, helping the anemone acclimate. And then at some point, I'm going to decide that all that water's been changed out. Okay, and take that specimen container, flip it around on the inside of my lower tank, and let that water just continue to drip inside the tank. Okay, now the reason being, you want the specimen container to be getting no light at first, then getting a little bit of light. Okay, it's going to be shipped to you in a freaking styrofoam box overnight. You don't want to shock it. You don't want to just all of a sudden have a bunch of light on it. Okay, you want to watch and let it react to the light. Move that piece of cardboard over a quarter at a time, then a halfway over, and then just take it off altogether. Then it's going to be sitting there opening up to the light in your tank, in the top tank, sitting off to the side of the sump. Okay? Then, presuming that you have similar lighting in your sump, or if you can tune your lighting to a similar spectrum in your sump, you can go ahead and do that overflow process for a while. Or if you don't, I keep 2-tier tanks. I call it a sump, but for me it's just I have one tank on top of another tank. But if you don't, you can then at that point put the anemone off to the side in the specimen container in the tank, and let that hole continue to cycle the water slowly, naturally in and out of the specimen container, while that anemone continues to adjust to the light off to the side. And it should be at this point fully mounted and based on the side of the plastic of the specimen container, and it should be just gently relaxed and opened up to your light. And you want to wait until it looks happy and relaxed and like it likes your light before moving it further into the system. Now, before moving it further into the system, you need to ramp your lights down. Estimate, probably about 50% on higher lighting systems. On more focused lighting systems, it might be as far down as 20%. But you need to estimate where you're going to put that anemone, its lighting, and try to equalize it to the lighting that you have it in right now off to the side. Okay, so simulate this off to the side lighting that's not stressing it out, it's just barely getting used to the light. You lower your total lights to where you want to put the anemone is the same as that light. So then when it's adjusting to the position that you move it to, it's only adjusting to the position. It's already acclimated to the light, it's already acclimated to the water. Now you're just going to move it. And it's going to say, okay, here, I feel safe. What you want to find, ideally, is a hole that looks like it's drilled. Okay? Some sort of crevice that you can clean out that doesn't have an ongoing hole to it, that's bigger than the base. That gives it room to grow its base. Okay. But the side of a rock with just the slightest indentation, clean that out. I mean, use your fingernails. You clean it off real good. Don't let any of the little sponges or algae or follicles of any kind of thing that's on that rock right now irritate that anemone. Let it have this nice, clean area to sit, surrounded by shit that would irritate it. And then guess what? As long as you get your current right, and I'll discuss that in a second, and as long as you don't stress it out with either an increase in lighting or too little lighting, you already found what it liked. You off to the side, it's approved of your lighting spectrum, but it's not ready for full lighting yet. So you don't want to get it to where it's in a more intense spot. You need to lower your light down, find the spot, scrape that spot clean. And as you raise your lighting up over the next couple of days, in fact, you're going to want to raise your lighting a little bit up over the course of that same day, presuming you don't wind up putting the anemone in there at night. And if you do, if you do towards the evening hours have an anemone, because say it gets there around noon and you spend 6 hours acclimating it, you're putting it in a tank and now your lights are ready to go off, you want to go ahead and turn up your moonlighting. You want to give that anemone a center to focus on so it knows up from down, so it knows where it wants to be, where it can get to the light. And if you have that in place, that little area where you scraped off is going to be its perfect little spot. Okay? Just the same way you would rub your thumb on the bottom of the glass to get the sea bay or the long tentacle from having to fight bacteria, the little algae and little glass sponges and little microscopic this and that's and sometimes even little sharp tube worm things all grow out of your rocks. And it's very hard to see, but if you just take some fingernails, take a jug cap, something, nylon, a guitar pick or equivalent, alright, and just scrape that crap off of there, that anemone will be happier there, healthier there, and chances are, as long as you don't fuck anything else up, it's going to stay right there where you put it as long as you can keep those conditions the same. Now, current for a bubble tip. Some people wind up giving an ideal rock position and very, very ample lighting to a rose bubble and maintaining the health of that rose bubble for a very long time. But you might notice the tentacles get really, really long. Now, my water conditions are shit, that anemone's hungry, and the lights are off, so it's not all bubbly like it is during the daytime. During the daytime, this anemone gets bubbly. Go look at my other videos. This is a bubbly anemone. Now, the reason why bubble tips do that is to regulate their temperature and their zooxanthellae activity. Okay? So, basically, it forms kind of an umbrella that helps maintain an equal amount of light over their entire base. And if you look, the anemone will be sitting like this, and it'll have only these tentacles bubbly, and these tentacles will be long or stubby, but they'll be thin. They'll just have maybe little bulbs in them. But these tentacles up here will be big and bulbous. Well, there's zooxanthellae in the tentacles themselves, and they're absorbing sunlight like that. And then what's happening is the disc usually has a different type of zooxanthellae. That's why you see that the pink is on the tentacles and the green is on the disc, right? And like we know from the all green rose bubbles, they like that lower, deeper water lighting. So what it's doing is it's equalizing the spectrum there from the raised part of the disc to the lower part of the disc and making it like it's flat and all getting the same amount of light. So it's shading the part that's getting more light and not shading the part that's getting less light. And that's how a rose bubble anemone is supposed to be. That's how they are in the wild. What happens in many people's very nice reef tanks, okay, just spot on in all of their cases, they can have a little bit too low of lighting or just a little bit too much current. And either one of these things can cause it to lose its bubbly tentacles. Now, what the current does is pretty obvious. It just beats the crap out of it, okay? And there's, unless you're feeding it like probably every day, it's not going to be able to maintain its strength the way it would in the wild when it's eating multiple times per day, probably. Just little pieces of plankton get caught and stung and pulled into its mouth, little baby shrimps and all kinds of shit all over the course of a day. And those complex nutrients help it maintain its integrity, its structural cellular integrity. And people who have those high current systems, those high halide lighting systems, you might find that they don't feed their anemones that often. And that combination of factors causes the anemone's tentacles to go long and limp. Okay, and that's why you'll see rose bubble tips that there's just nothing bubbly about them. They look like a rose long tentacle, And as far as the lighting goes, if that rose bubble has just almost enough lighting to where it's not going to stress out and it's not going to bleach, it'll only keep its tentacles bubbly partially for part of the day, because it's trying to get as much of that light down to the base as possible. Now, if it's getting little enough light or an insufficient amount of light to maintain its health, what you're going to find is that anemone is going to inflate its base. It's going to look really big. Oh, look, it's really happy. It's really big. No, it's trying to get light. It's starving. It's reaching out like a little baby bird for food. Okay? And they look pretty good when they do this. Okay? But you'll notice that the tentacles are really long. They're not bubbly. Like if it's sitting there in a nice, beautiful disc shape and it's got symmetrical bubbly tentacles, and it's, the light is facing from this way and it's got the bubbles up on top like it's supposed to, that anemone's fine. But when that anemone starts to try to turn its entire base to the light and then tries to bubble up all of its tentacles, it's basically trying to grab for as much food as possible, both sunlight and stuff in the water, as opposed to just staying relaxed and letting what comes to it come to it. Kumquat. Something. Yeah. And they can, at this point, when you see them swell up like that, you'll be thinking everything's fine, and then the next day you'll see them ejecting that brown zooxanthellae. And you'll think it's pooing. It's not pooing. That's ejecting some of its algae because it can't use it all because there's not enough light. Okay? Now, in that window, when that anemone just first, if you can spot it, when it first starts to eject zooxanthellae, and this is going to sound crazy to anyone who hasn't experienced it yet, but this is absolutely the case as far as my experience goes. If you see that anemone starting to poo out the brown out of its mouth poo, and then you rush to the store or to your shelf or to another tank or whatever it takes, and you get another light on there. even if it's a temporary light, a shop light. Put a little 6500 power compact fluorescent bulb and a little dome light. Put it on there. If you just increase the light, it's going to suck that zooxanthellae right back into its butt mouth. Butt. Right back into its booth. Whatever. And it'll just redisperse it. It'll just eat it and redisperse it. The same way it acquires zooxanthellae naturally, by sucking it in from the fucking other corals and other stuff that release it in the water. You got about a half an hour to an hour from the time that zooxanthellae starts coming out to when it's going to get released by the tentacles. If you increase the light during that time period, even if it's just being held on by the tentacles and there's only a little string left in the mouth, that anemone will react to the light by reconsuming that zooxanthellae. Assuming that the rest of your tank is healthy. And then, if you got a temporary solution, then you have the option of procuring a long-term solution. Just leave that light right there while you order another, strip light. I really, really like the response I've gotten out of the mix of a Coralife Aqualite S and a Current USA or Orbit, the loop light, right? The Coralife seems to have just a little bit more of a purple spectrum, and the Current has more of a blue spectrum. And I feel like if I would have left one of those green bubbles under both of those lights instead of moving it under just one, it probably would have lived. I had one green bubble that I just couldn't make happy once I had gotten it away from the clownfish. But if I would have been able to find a way to get it away from the clownfish and keep it under that same light, it would have done better. I mean, the clownfish were just nipping that anemone to shreds, man. I didn't know what the hell to do about it. They love their rose bubbles, though. I mean, look at that. They're just perfectly content. The light trick does not work on corals as far as I know. The only things that I could think that it might have a chance of working on is LPS. The big stony polyp corals that are very similar to anemones. Now, I don't have enough experience to tell you whether or not those corals do the same type of ejection from too little light. But if you go and look on the PAR ratings of your light and the depth that you have that coral at, and make sure the surface is clean, and that anemone is ejecting zooxanthellae, your water conditions are otherwise okay, but you have like a Duncan that's spurting, or a Acan or something like that that's spurting a little zooxanthellae, I would think it would probably be temperature related. But if you can look up and confirm that it's just not getting enough light, then the plausible explanation is that it's ejecting the zooxanthellae because it's not getting enough light. Now, it's usually the case that anemones aren't getting enough light because it's fucking hard to bake an anemone. You just put all the light you can put over a tank, as long as the temperature is okay, and the anemone's just gonna be like, yes, more, Except for a green bubble, that's gonna be like, oh, this is nice, but I like it from down here. It's still gonna love it though. It pooped, and a week later it died, but all the parameters were good. temperature spike. I have serious temperature issues with this tank. I mean, I've got 3, they're LEDs, but there's 3 of them over a 20-gallon long. Okay, I've got 2 currents and 1 core life over that one little tank. And I live in southern Louisiana, and our AC ain't worth the crap, you know. But primarily, okay, just to recap on what I've been talking about as far as environmental catastrophes go, and what's really causing the coral bleaching around the world. It's a combination of nitrates and phosphates with temperature that causes that kind of bleaching. Otherwise, you might not be getting enough light. Now, what you got to realize is that tests aren't accurate. They're not always accurate. They're just not accurate. Okay? The only thing that can be relied upon to keep a fish tank healthy is keeping track of maintenance and making sure that there are no spots in your tank that are producing massive amounts of nitrates and phosphates. Because what can happen is, in a localized area within a tank, there can be a nitrate and phosphate spike that can then, through current divulsion and the natural processes in your tank, get processed and converted into plant matter or whatever. And then when you're taking your sample up from the top corner of the tank, you don't get a reading. But down there, directly upwind, up current, from where something is sitting, you might have a nutrient sink. Okay? So, just bear that in mind long term. Get a pair of chopsticks, try to dig sand out from under your rocks, stir it up, and then shovel it back. You know, do siphoning on coarse sand, do regular stirring on fine sand. And make sure that you have a calcium reactor or otherwise equivalent going constantly. I use a non-gassed, just open kind of bed of coarse aragonite, not crushed coral, like the actual granular aragonite, like kitty litter size. Right upstream from my top-off water. So the top-off water lowers the pH just a little bit, causes the magnesium and calcium carbonate to dissolve into the water just a little bit, and I augment that with 2-part solution. So that way I don't have to use very much 2-part solution. I use like less than half the recommended amount. And I've made my 1-liter bottles last a very long time that way. And my SPS is a little brittle right now, but like I said, I'm way behind on maintenance right now. I had both chambers of my DI resin were basically brown. There was just the tiniest bit of blue left in the first one, and that's just not how it's supposed to work. But I finally got 2 pounds in. I got new DI resin, and as soon as I can allot enough time to do it, I'm going to do a big freaking water change, at least 10 gallons. 10 gallons is a big water change for me. I don't like to rely on water changes. When I have like a 20-gallon or a 40-gallon system, yeah, I'll do a water change once a week on it, and not even worry about doing anything but some Reef Complete, you know, the calcium, magnesium, strontium. Good shit for a little nano tank. Old school, but works. But for a big system like this, you know, I'm going through 1.5 gallons of top-off water a day. For me to do weekly water changes, I would go through so much fucking DI resin, it would be unbelievable. I apparently do not have good water quality to start with around here. I mean, like, my pre-filter turns brown after a few months. 1 second, please. So anyways, what size tank and how much lighting do you have on there? And let me go back into the acclimation procedures. Now that we've covered short term, I guess, we've got the anemone on the rock, on our little scraped off part. Got the lighting the same, ramped down, as it was when it was, what we had it earlier, in the corner. Now, you might have your lights at 50% during this time period if you want, if you got really powerful lights. And then when you move it over to the rock, before you move it over to the rock, ramp it down to 20%. Huh. So, then you're going to have a situation where, unless your lighting was exactly the same as the pet store's lighting and it's been at the pet store for a while, or exactly, well, actually no, even if your lighting just happens to be exactly the same as the holding facility where it came in after being in the wild. See, the thing is, it's going to be in the first holding facility for a matter of days. It's going to be in the second holding facility for maybe 2 weeks tops. And the anemone, by the time it gets into your tank, if it hasn't been at the fish store in the same lighting that you have for, months, it's going to be wary of where it is. It's not going to want to adjust right away. Now, it may have lost some zooxanthellae once. A lot of them that wind up getting sold as rainbows or supers are ones that have basically bleached. Okay? And it's because they didn't acclimate to the holding facility's lighting. If they... Actually, it might be because they did and there just wasn't enough lighting. Savvy? But if they kept their zooxanthellae through these changing events, okay, you're talking about a couple days here, a couple days there, they might have lost a little bit of zooxanthellae in the first one. Then they get to the second one, they're just like, we're just going to hold on to this and see where it goes from here. Then they're going to get into your tank. And they're going to wait the time period that they had been waiting in these other places, whether it be a week or 2 weeks. They're going to wait at least that long before ejecting their zooxanthellae again. Now, if it had been one place then another, or if it had been one place for really long and then goes into your tank, it might eject the zooxanthellae right away. But if it's going from one holding place to another, and then into your tank, and your tank is just fine, and you got great lighting, it still might wind up having to adjust, because your lighting is going to be different, spectral intensity, something's going to be different about it. Your temperature is going to be different, your conditions are going to be different. And once it feels like it's established there, once it realizes it's not just going to have a different color of lighting soon, okay, treat it like a fish, treat it like an animal. It's not a dumb, it's not just a blob of stuff. Okay, it has a consciousness to an extent. It's taken me a long time to observe this, but for 30 years, I've observed this. They do have some ability to perceive and plan. Okay? And what they're going to do is decide what of the different species of zooxanthellae, the multiple different colors of zooxanthellae they have within their flesh, that is most efficient in their environment. They're going to give it a while because they've been moved around a bunch. If they haven't been moved around a bunch, you'll see it happen pretty quick. Okay. But if they've been moved around a bunch, like these wild rose bubbles I got, it'll take a while. And you might see, if you add a second anemone, you might see your older anemone absorb the colors from the new anemone. You might see them interchange and swap colors back and forth for a while, and you'll think they've switched positions, but they haven't. I've documented some of that happening with these two. But over the course of a couple days, you're going to want to get your lights. You know, if you got really intense lighting over the course of a week, ramp it up 10% at a time, you know. But when it gets back to its full spectrum, you're still going to see some changes. Because once it stays constant for a while, that's when the anemone is going to decide to make its final adjustments. Okay? And it might spew out all the green and have nothing but red left. It might spew out some of the red left and turn a lot more green. It might spew out a lot of both and turn brown. Okay, depending on the light, depending on your ramp cycle. And I've struggled for a long time to find my ideal ramp cycle, but I'm very happy with what I have. But what's going to happen is, based on the intensity of that lighting and how much of the zooxanthellae it keeps that's conducive to that lighting, you're going to have to adjust your feeding schedule to allow this anemone to properly acclimate long term to your tank. Okay, so let's start with the small anemones or the bleached anemones. You're going to have to feed them often. Okay, it says wait to feed your anemone on most of the online help things that you'll find. If you get one of those small super ones, because you think you want a super one, but you want a small one so you can afford it, feed that thing as soon as it looks like it wants to be fed. Give it a little piece of mussel or clam, something really nutrient dense, but give it a little piece. And then feed it every day after that. Okay? You want it to know that in that spot where it is going to be able to grow and be happy. If you do not, by the third day that thing will disappear. And even if it does stay on the rock where you put it, it'll just slowly start to shrink. It'll be less and less able to, starting from the third day, even be able to grab food. Okay? If it's got a lot of color but it's still small, it'll still be able to grab food in a couple days, but it'll be shrinking rapidly. And you don't want that. You want to be able to, in this time period where it's still adjusting zooxanthellae, not producing food for itself as efficiently as it can, feed it every day. Get it growing. Get it to split if you can. Get it growing. Get that little bit of anemone to a sustainable size, to where if you had to not feed it for a week, it wouldn't just shrivel up to nothingness. Okay? Because those little anemones, they need a lot of light processed efficiently, or they're going to shrink if not fed. So that period where they're adjusting, where they're still establishing what color they want to be, you know, what overall spectrum of and mix of zooxanthellae works best in that new environment that they're in, they need to be fed regularly or they're going to shrivel up to nothing. And those small anemones, if you want to grow them out, you got to feed them every 3 days. You can feed them every day if you feed them little small bits, and I find that that's probably the best way. Like that one right there started pretty small. Like, in fact, both of them did. They started less than 3 inches. They're easily over 5 inches now, both of them. And as far as the light timing itself, I have, let's see, about 14 hours of blue and 6 hours of white. but I have maybe 2 hours of all my white. Okay, maybe 2 hours of peak white. Okay, but I have 3 different lighting strips. So I have the one blue start up, and then the other blue start up, and then the other blue start up, and then I have the one light start up, and then the one white start up, and then the last white start up, and then the first white turn off, and then the second white turn off, and then the last white turn off, and then the first blue, So it's kind of like a sunrise, sunset effect, front to back on my tank. And I enjoy the way that looks over the course of the day. I enjoy the bright light coming in from behind the rocks in the morning. But the anemones overall like the mixed light more than they like just the blue light. And they can't maintain full health unless you give them that couple of hours every day of intense white light. Okay? They stay relaxed and they maintain better coloration overall when they have those long periods of blue light before and after the white light. But you cannot just have them under bluish light all day long. They need that 6,500 Kelvin plant growing white intense freaking light, and they start to really, really color up. And it's that white light, if you've kept corals for a while, it's that white light that actually makes the coral color up, that makes them look so brilliant during the blue light periods. And assuming that you don't have a hidden nitrate spike, okay, if you have brown zooxanthellae growing a lot, you have a hidden nitrate spike. You might not be testing for it at the surface of the water, but it's happening down in the bottom of the water in a little zone, and then that zone is being dissipated through other rocks, and those rocks are processing the nitrates. But in that one little zone, you've got a nitrate problem, okay? And those corals around that zone are going to look brown. And eventually they're going to be prone to RTN as soon as you lack a little bit of magnesium. Yeah. That was an interesting point that made me lose track of the other points I was making. So, back open to questions. Hermits and limpets and ball anemones. That doesn't tell me what size your tank is. A Duncan, to me, seems to enjoy pretty significant lighting, around 150 to 200 par. I don't know if they like it any brighter than that. I saw most people were keeping them either on the sand beds or on the sides of rocks. So I put mine on that rock that's kind of just halfway up. I need to pull that freaking Kenya tree because I think he's given the Duncan too much shade. But that's it right there. My lonely little Duncan. Oh, 10 gallons, eh? Probably not enough lighting. It's difficult to really understand how much light a little tank like that actually needs for these types of corals. Okay? I would keep a minimum of 2 full-length, high-quality, not those Chinese ones, strip lights on there. Those fashionable single central diffuse lights, they do good for a little small bit of coral in the middle of the tank. But when it comes to those areas in the corners where you might put your Duncan, it's just not going to cut it, man. The Current USA makes an 18 to 24 inch light that'll go straight across a 10-gallon tank. And I'm sure you could fit 2 of them across a 10-gallon tank. And the 18 to 24 model would be the full 18 inches, so the whole top of the tank would have light. You'd still have a place in the middle of the tank where you could grow SPS, because it would be like centered. The maximum amount of combined points would be there. But then in all the corners and the whole tank, like this tank here, I got this rose bubble. It's all the way in the corner of the tank, and it never wants to move. That's because the light's all the way in the corner of the tank. And I like those. I like the Current USA and Coral Life lights for that. I like the long, cheap strip. What can I say? I'm all about the cheap strippers. I mean, wait a minute. Oh, cool. Relic Turtle says go check out the lights on his channel. They're Aqua Night. They have 3 types CRE LEDs. Yeah, I think the Current USA gets underrated because what people don't realize is that they've got the full 4 LED spectrum in there. They've got a 10,000 Kelvin, a 6,500 Kelvin, they've got a 420 and a 460 nanometer, all going at the same time. And you get that fancy little different light shows, the rolling cloud effects. Oh, come on. Who doesn't love showing their company and friends the rolling cloud effects? Make your wife a little ribeye steak and some potatoes and a nice little broccoli with some cheese on it or something, right? Put some candles on the ground in front of your fish tank. Set up a little dinner right there on the ground in front of the fish tank, and put that current loop on rolling cloud effect. And she's just going to remember that night forever. But anyways, is Aqua Nights made in America? I'm really keen on trying made in America products. After for years basically being a fluval person. I have been a fluval person for as long as they stopped calling them Hagens. In fact, I didn't really like it when they stopped calling it Hagen, because I liked Hagen. Hagen Aquaclear, Hagen. It's like, we are German and we do things properly, and this is all you need because we are German. No Jews were harmed during the making of this filter. And that's why they had to change it to Fluval, because it sounded too German. They either had to put no Jews were harmed during the making of the filter, or they had to change it to Fluval. So they changed it to Fluval. Because, well, not many people get that joke. And let's face it, there's a growing number of political assholes these days that wouldn't buy a product if it advertised that no Jews were harmed. Never mind. Why not? Okay, anyways. Aquaneat. Not Aquanite. Aquaneat. Yeah, I have those. I have those on my broodstock tanks, and I have those on my planted tank down there at the bottom. I have 2 different fuges that both run Aquaneats. I run an Aquaneat as supplementary light on my 55 gallon, and I run an Aquaneat on that 10 gallon down there with Humachica in it. Did they, are you talking to type, or did they change their name? Or is that just a different company from China with a similar sounding name? Aquanite? Maybe they just changed it. I'm tempted to go on eBay and try to find out. Oh, I'm not sure. Not the Chinese one. As far as the Fluval was the parent company that bought Hagen, and I think they own a few other different little sub companies. But for a while, you could buy Fluval and Hagen products, even while Fluval owned Hagen. And it was like a merged company, but they were still making the separate product lines. And that's Hagen. But I had, I had aquaclears I bought in the 80s that lasted me all through the 90s, like those aquaclear hang over the back filters are a marvel of engineering, man. It's just like it does what it's supposed to, There's no surprises with them. They don't break in unforeseeable ways. I've never had a motor just go out. Never. The only thing I've ever had go wrong is the propeller break. I had one impeller get seized up because I didn't clean it and let it dry out too long, so it all corroded and salt, Just couldn't get it out there. I probably could have worked harder and actually salvaged that one. That was a powerhead, Hagen aquaclear powerhead. But I just, out of stupidity and frustration, I threw it away. Later realizing, I probably could have fixed it. Just because I had it for so damn long that it was kind of believable that it had finally died after, 20 years, Oh, good. It can rest now. You've done your part, little powerhead. I mean, I had that thing in a 10-gallon and a 30-gallon and a fucking... I had it in a 20 long. I had it in multiple 10-gallons over the years, actually. I had it in a 29-gallon. Even when I wasn't keeping aquariums, I just kept that thing in case I would keep aquariums again. I wound up keeping aquariums again. For a while, when I had first started the channel, all I had was a 10-gallon with a damsel in it. Because we were moving. So I had my 30 on top of a 10 back in New Orleans, where if you look at the Easy Reefers Facebook or Patreon channels, I'd appreciate it if you went to the Patreon channel. But Facebook I'm less than enthusiastic about, but please go leave a like there if you want to. And you can see lots of different photos of the clownfish I've bred, and you can see my old setup from 10 years ago. I don't have any pictures of tanks that I had before that, because you're talking about the mid-90s and back to the 80s. And, sorry. But we were, my wife and I and our 2 kids had all of our crap in one of those giant U-Hauls, the biggest U-Haul they make. We had all of our stuff in there. We were moving out of town, okay, so we didn't want to make 2 trips. And then the place that we wound up getting sprung an additional deposit on us, and we couldn't do it. And then they were just telling us to go fuck ourselves, and we wound up parking at my mom's house. And my mom died about a year ago, but she'd been kind of going crazier than usual in her old age, and her last year's or whatever. And I had about 15 different species of coral and one true percula clownfish in my little 10-gallon. And it all died the next day. I had an aquaclear, I had a heater, it was in the sump, it was an established sand bed. Had prime in there. I'm pretty sure my mom poisoned my fish tank. You know? You don't have that kind of problem. I could have put those corals in a bucket and they would have lasted longer. Okay? I mean, it died. Died quick. The clownfish, the true percula, died. The true percula. Okay? Those are the hardiest fish. Those are like the ultimate beginner fish. You don't even have to salinity acclimate a true percula. Okay? Barely. The reason why is because they live in tide pools in the wild. The darker ones, the onyx ones especially, they live in freaking tide pools. So if they can jump from one salinity to the next, they're a good fish to have. Now, a lot of people make the mistake, speaking of salinity acclimation on fish, of thinking that, you can just acclimate a fish for a half an hour and put them in your tank. Or no. Even 3 hours sometimes isn't good enough. Acclimating a fish to a new tank depends on one thing. Whether or not it's going from a high salinity to a low salinity, or from a low salinity to a high salinity. If it's going from a high salinity to a low salinity, half an hour is fine. For most fish, especially clownfish and hardy fish. Okay? For a delicate fish, an hour and a half. If the salinity that the fish is going from is lower than the salinity that the fish is going to, a hardy fish, like a true percula even, you'd be better off acclimating them an hour at least per point. A delicate fish, even on a celarus, they're particularly susceptible to bladder damage. Okay? They're not as hardy as a true percula when it comes to salinity changes. I would recommend 3 hours per point of salinity. Okay? And, that actually brings me back to why you really should just quarantine everything. Because quarantine is the time where you take that fish from its 021, possibly even 019 salinity, where, people that sell fish only have their fish, okay? In their fish only system, they keep the salinity down because it's cheaper and it's, overall it's usually healthier for short-term storage. But, any fish that's sensitive, when it goes from a low salinity to a high salinity, if it experiences more than a point per 3 hours, it can seriously stress the fish out. Okay, so if you're going from 021 to 025, you're talking about a 12-hour acclimation. So you need a quarantine tank just to acclimate a fish. So, quarantine is the way to go. When it comes to moving fish within your house, or fish that have already been quarantined, or moving fish within your store, What I always like to do, and any experienced store owner would agree with you, is say if you're in, the one tank that you have them in, whether it be just a tank or in quarantine, you want to have raised the salinity of that tank ahead of time, little by little, on that basis of 3 hours per point. Okay. And then you actually want to lower the salinity in the receiving system by 1 point. Okay? Because when you move fish, they will actually de-stress better moving into a slightly lower salinity. It won't shock them at all. It'll just suddenly be like they're breathing easier. Okay? It's like if you get used to going to the mountains, and then you climb down from the mountain. Oh, look at all this hair. It'll be the same experience for the fish. They have an osmotic process that's dependent on the salinity of the water. The less salinity, the less stress they endure during that osmotic process. And basically, the easier it becomes for them to breathe and balance themselves out. Okay, it reduces their stress in other ways. Almost gives them a kind of euphoria, like you would if you had pure oxygen. Okay? So, even in your reef tank, if you're moving from a quarantine, you have your salinity at 0.25, you raise the quarantine to 0.25. Just before you move the fish to the reef tank, dump a couple gallons of fresh water in there. Fucking everything will be fine. If you don't have salinity spikes or anything like that, put it in the sump. It'll disperse like a rainstorm in the wild. Okay? As long as you don't do this often, your corals aren't going to freak out. Once. Don't do it a bunch of times. Don't leave that salinity down low. Okay? Don't drop it any more than a point. But then what you want is that fish to go from 0.25 to 0.24. And then for it over the course of the next 12 hours or so to evaporate back to 0.25. Anyways. Jibao wave makers. Now, Jibao used to make power heads, and the power heads used to leak electricity into the water. So once again, I'm back to buying American when it comes to power heads. I'll spend a couple of extra dollars for something either American or possibly even German. But I think the best compromise, unless there's some big quality increase of Jibao that I don't know about, I think would probably be the Hydor Coralia. I don't have any experience with those, but the price range seems nice. And I think that's what is that? It's a Dutch company or something like that. I'm not even sure where the hell they're made. But it seems like most people are happy with those. A lot of people seem happy with the Jibos, and it's great features for the price. But I just had bad experiences with their products before they came out with that stuff, Now, if Rio, the nano protein skimmer and the little cheap pump maker, if they came out with a wave maker, I'd be keen to buy that. But I was so adamant about avoiding having that electric shock that comes from Chinese underwater products. After several years it takes for this to happen, right? But I tried going with an AC wave maker so I could use the little Fluval CP2 pumps. That worked great for a little while, but that's just it wears the pump. It wears the bump stops out on those AC wave makers, so it just doesn't work long term. You have to keep replacing parts, and that's no way to operate. So what I wound up doing, because of the extra features, and because it's made in America, I wound up going with the full current loop system. I've got one loop pump wave maker on there and one loop pump wave maker on there. Yeah, I mean, for all I know, they could have upped their manufacturing process and worked out the glitches and everything. But, you know, you get what you pay for. And the less I buy from China, the better. Okay, that's just me. If China wants to start acting as a check on the old horde that was once the bane of China's existence, instead of cooperating with the old horde and helping them destroy Europe and the West, then I'll be interested in buying Chinese products again. In fact, I was planning on, just before it became too much trouble to go into the car business, I was planning on, if I wound up making a little mechanic shop, selling those China Girl bicycle motors, you know, the eBay bicycle engine kits, the China Girl kits. That's like a Chinese thing, man. And I had a plan for recognition of the international sacredness of some ancient aspects of Chinese culture that, obviously, if you remind me of, I'll have to discuss on the other channel. But anyways, I'm just not trying to do them any favors. And as far as on this channel goes, I really like the idea of, to what I can, promote the good aspects of these American products. They're not perfect, they're not the cheapest, they're not the best, but they're good for the money. They're made in America. And the only one I've had problems with is the one that saltwateraquarium.com pissed me off by sending to me to begin with. It just happened to be that one that went bad on me, the wave pump. I had ordered from them and they sent me the wrong thing, and then they sent me a different thing, and it was like a repackaged something that they pulled, you know. For all I know, it was a return, and it was the one that went out. Anyways, so that's the lost begotten, as in inheritor, as in people are waiting for the baby Jesus to come back and they have no idea who he is. Lost. But anyways, so the difference between short-term and long-term acclimation as it pertains to anemones, and maybe even LPS, okay, is as that anemone, you just got to keep this in mind over that 2 weeks to 1 month period, okay, even maybe off into 3 months. You'll be adjusting this cycle, but it'll come naturally after the first month, right? The less light, the less photosynthesis, the less effective light that it's getting, okay, the more it's going to need to be fed. As it adjusts to its final full coloration as it fully adjusts to your light over the course of 3 months, it'll only need to be fed every 2 weeks, 1 week. But during that first period, you're looking at 3 to 5 days, depending on the size. The smaller, the more often it needs to be fed. The more bleached, the more often it needs to be fed. But you can take a bleached anemone and have it fully recover by sitting with other healthy anemones as long as you feed it every day. If you feed it every day, it will grow tissue, and that tissue will take on the zooxanthellae of the surrounding anemones. If you don't feed it every day, it will continue to contract, and it will not take on the zooxanthellae of the surrounding anemones. Okay? And if you go too long without feeding it, it'll lose the ability to feed. There's certain protein compounds in the meaty foods that an anemone needs to eat that help it create its actual stinging cells. It can't get that from just the nutrients and alkalinity in the water. It has to have the complex proteins in it. I don't know whether Coral Vite or any of those fatty acid supplements might help with that, but I don't think so. Anyways, so do we have any more questions about what anemones are right for what setup? Generally speaking, if you're wondering, you should get a rose bubble. If you want to be guaranteed the best chance of success, get a rose bubble. I like the large B grade off of saltwaterfish.com. Sweet. $59 is, I think, how much the large rose bubble is going for on saltwaterfish.com. Why is that chat window so small? I'm sorry about that. That's supposed to be bigger so it can be legible. Not legible. Visible. Perceivable. Decipherable. Insert fucking word that makes sense and, have fun. The best one for a clownfish harem, for a large amount of clownfish. If you're going to do it with rose bubbles, you're going to need multiple rose bubbles. Rose bubbles don't get that big before they split. You could go to saltwaterfish.com, order 3 of those rose bubbles that come 3 to 5 inches, grow them out to 5 to 7 inches, and then add your clownfish. When getting a harem, though, as a clownfish breeder, trust me, the younger the better. Once I get my store, I will be selling clownfish harems comprised of runts. Just because that's the only way it really works out in the long run. But if you had a group of runts, then you could keep them in just a couple of little rose bubbles, and they'd be fine. But clownfish will grow 3 to 5 inches themselves, so you'll need 2 anemones per 3 clownfish, basically, if you're going to use rose bubbles. If you want to have skunk clowns or clarky clowns, you're going to want to keep a big sea bay anemone in a big system. If you're going to want any other type of clownfish, like false periculas, aceleris, to live in a harem inside of an anemone, multiple rose bubbles, they might not ever take to a rose bubble. A regular aceleris might not ever take to a rose bubble. They might, but that probably won't ever take to it. But a riteri, a false percula, that has never seen a rittereye in its little captive bred life will just be intoxicated by the rittereye. It will not be able to resist the rittereye. And chances are you can get a very, very pleasant harem effect from a bunch of false brachialas, designer, snowflake, ice, Darwins, whatever, and that rittereye anemone. But the rittereye is the only one really that grows big enough, other than maybe a sea bay can grow that big, but it takes a long time. The rittereyes are the ones that you buy them, and they already are that big. And they're perfectly suitable for a harem. But rittereye requires the absolute perfect stability of water parameters, and requires a mountain of rock in the middle of the tank that it can climb up on to get right to the light. And the light has to be 300 par or better. It has to be intense lighting. The best lighting you can put on your tank, then you can have a rittereye. Similes, like as opposed to metaphors? Now, like the difference between me and the other reef keeping channels that you find on here promoted is that these guys are very successful at what they do, but their experience comes from success, as opposed to guys like Leon Panetta and like me who've been doing it for 30 years plus. Our experience comes from mistake after mistake after mistake. And then, for the past maybe 10 years, we've seen this hobby grow into something where people can just get right into it and be successful. And it's a great thing, right? But the advice that you need for a low-budget system, and the advice that you need for a high-budget system, are completely different and come from completely different perspectives. Like low budget system, reactors are out of the question. Electronic monitoring is out of the question. That's not low budget stuff. Okay? We're talking about tanks under 120 gallons, no automation, some kind of manual top off, relying on live rock and plants to do most of the filtration work, and just maintenance. Okay? And what I focus on this channel is how to make the best of and reduce the overall quantity of that maintenance without having to spend the extra money on these other things. Okay? When it all comes down to it, all these expensive solutions are designed to do is to cut down on the manual maintenance. Now, a lot of them go beyond that and provide stability that I'm not going to be able to really provide in my tanks. I'm not going to be able to keep a Galaxia. I'm not going to be able to keep a Rittereye. Okay, but I can keep some Acros, I can keep Montipora, I can keep Turbinaria. I can keep most things, just not all things, as long as I maintain these practices that I've developed over these 30 years that, keep me from having to buy GFO. I don't have to put granular rust in my system. I just, I got my big ass planted tank, and I just pull the plants out the bottom tank, put it in the top tank where those fish eat it. The cycle continues. I've gotten these tanks to where I don't even feed the fish every day. It's gotten to where I'm feeding them like every 3 days. And they're not getting skinny at all. They've still got nice little fat bellies. They've got plenty of caulerpa and copepods and everything else to eat. And I've got an overspec protein skimmer. I use a foam pre-filter on the protein skimmer. I clean the foam pre-filter so I don't have to keep taking apart the protein skimmer. I take the chamber off, I clean the chamber every other day, take the pre-filter off, replace it with a clean one every other day, and that keeps the water clean. To keep the nutrients, again, I have my bottom tank, the water goes this way into the plants, okay? Then there's a divider with slots at the bottom. On the other side of those slots at the bottom, there is a big mountain of kitty litter sized granular aragonite. My top off water drips in right here, goes through the aragonite, and then into my return pump. That, and just a little 2-part solution, is how I've, kept all this alive with no water changes for going over 3 months now. Those little sponge fry filters, if you just look up sponge fry filter off pre-filter on eBay, you can buy like 5 of them for $4 or something like that. I think I have a total of 7. I bought like a 3-pack and a 4-pack. Something like that. I think I might have more, just a couple of them are missing, I don't know. But I'll just, go and wash them all at once and then go change them out one at a time over the course of the time when they sit in a little thing and they all get dirty and I got a little dirty pile of them. I take the dirty pile of them to the sink, wash them all out. Before I put them in the tank, I always squeeze them and then absorb tank water real quick and then squeeze that out. Absorb tank water real quick and do that 3 times. I give them 3 little rinses before I go and I submerge it. And then I use my JBJ claw to actually put it on the little pre-filter, on the tube inlet. Because my protein skimmer is not in my sump. My protein skimmer is on the 55-gallon hanging on the back of it. It's a Seaside Aquatics ES1, I think, or ES2, the bigger one, the newer, bigger one, the one that has the outlet straight out, not to the side. And it's a horse, man. I have that protein skimmer, and then I have a Lee's countercurrent 80s style. Those things were actually invented in the late 70s. I have a freaking Lee's countercurrent air-operated protein skimmer in my blue round tub over there, where my stomatellas are grown out from larvae, and they get about yay big before crawling back into the rest of the system through the plumbing. And if they go into the 55-gallon, the triggerfish eats them. But there's hundreds of them. Last I checked, anyways. My favorite cleanup crew member. Okay? It's not voracious. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's going to keep a mostly tidy reef tank very tidy. But it's going to do so while not knocking over any of your coral frags. Which to me is wonderful because I don't glue coral frags. I put them in a hole and I let them attach to the rock. I've never even had glue. I've never had any kind of glue. I don't run carbon very often, so if I had glue in the system, I would run carbon just because, like, the fuck is in the glue, Anyway. But it's just like, it's an extra thing to buy. If I can get by without buying something, I'm doing my budget method, right? And if I can advise you on how to do it, that's what I'm here for. And what I do when I get my coral frags is I go not to where they sell the coral frags, but to where they sell the big coral heads. And I look for the little piece that got broken off, that's not even glued to a frag plug. And I'll say, I'll give you $5 for that. And, you know, I used to be friends with Rick of Rick's Reef down in Metairie. He was kind of my mentor for a while. You know, I'd been keeping fish tanks for 15 years before I met him, but that's why he liked me. I recommend this if you can establish this type of a relationship with somebody who owns a fish store. You go into their coral tank and freaking clean it up for them. Like, start just by making them an offer. Say, you see all those corals under there? Do you mind if I, like, give you $20 for a few of them? And they'll usually say, okay, get what you're going to get, and then we'll see at the counter how much we're going to charge you for it, that kind of thing, right? But what you do is, while you're going in there for the little pieces that you want, go and find the other corals that need to be moved so that they can grow, so that they can make that guy some money. Okay? And that's what I eventually wound up doing every single weekend, was going into Rick's store and spending like 3 hours. These two, one on top of the other, with the plastic shelving in them, held together by tubes and zip ties, right? I would take the little, I mean, whether it be I found Hollywood Stunner under there. Most of the corals in this tank I found under there. And I would take the small pieces and I'd put them in my little specimen container to take home with me. But all the little bigger pieces, all the decent looking pieces, I would find a piece of rubble, wedge it between those pieces of rubble in one of the slots, and then by the next weekend it would have encrusted, and then he would have himself a freaking coral he could sell. And he probably got at least 60 colonies out of me that way, from corals that he either had, and maybe actually some of them had, some corals that he had bleached out from too much light. He didn't acclimate them. They had them on the top shelf when they shouldn't have been, but they were like behind some other corals so that they didn't get noticed, right? And like a piece would have broken off from that coral, and I'll be able to resurrect that coral that he bought or imported that one time, you know. But there would be glove polyps and mushrooms and pieces of parietes and acropora and bird's nest and turbinaria. I got that turbinaria from down there. And I'd just take them. And, you know, a corkscrew works pretty well. Or like a little hand drill, if you could actually find a hand drill these days. You can just drill a little hole in like a piece of rubble zone rock and stick a little finger of bird's nest in there. Okay? Or like in your live rock in your tank, you know, they got all the little holes, right? When you're first setting up your rock, try to face those holes where you're going to want your corals. And then when you go and get your corals, you just, instead of putting the frag plug there, you know, either take it off the frag plug or try to find, like I was talking about, a place that needs a little bit of help. You know, these guys that have a store but mostly make money off of service, those are the kinds of guys that you need to go and check out their stuff and offer them to help out for a discount on the little rubble that you keep, you know? At $20, get you fucking 10 frags. They ain't want them, you know? They got them sitting on the bottom. They're not for sale. Nobody retail is going to come in and say how much for that, because it's just sitting on the bottom. It looks like background material to most customers, right? But if you go and take some of them bits and put them up to where they can sell them, and then go take the little tiny bits and say, look, these aren't even as good as these, you'll get you a great deal on them. And then you just go start plugging them into your rocks. Hermit crabs will interfere with this process. Big time. Larger snails probably won't mean to, but they will interfere with this process. Stomatella. I think Inland Aquatics has some for sale. Once I get my store running, I'm going to have plenty for sale. They will reproduce in most systems readily. And they do not knock over the smallest frag. They just don't. They have a flat shell, so they're not bulky. And they're very, I don't know, just they're like little slug ninjas. No. They're very graceful for a, monopod. Yes, crabs are the devil, okay? Do not put any crabs in your system until all your corals are planted onto the rocks and growing nicely. And do not put any crabs in a system that has LPS. Because chances are your crabs are going and putting their claws right into the mouth of that LPS every single night and getting all the food out of it. Just one polyp at a time. And if you don't have clownfish on an anemone, they'll do the same thing to an anemone. Depending on the crab. Not all of them are that talented. But like your peppermint shrimps, candy cane shrimps, coral banded shrimps, all the bigger clawed shrimps that you see for sale will fuck up your anemones, man. They will not just starve them, but cut them up while they do it and cause the anemone to develop severe bacterial infections. And eventually the anemone is going to get stressed out and just die and dissolve. But anyways, speaking of dying and dissolving, I guess I should go over some basic symptoms of poor anemone health. Okay. First thing to look for to determine whether or not an anemone is healthy, okay, water parameters wise, is its mouth. Its mouth should look like a tight little, like, Republican accountant's asshole, like just a tight little sphincter, okay? If it's gaping, you've got water quality issues. Plain and simple. Chances are the overall mineral alkaline quality of the water is too low, and your salinity needs to be raised. If and only if your nitrates and phosphates are fine. If your nitrates are high and you raise your salinity, you will increase the noxiousness and toxicity of those nitrates. Okay? But if your nitrates are fine and your salinity is too low, you're going to get that gaping mouth thing. Okay? Now, another bad sign of anemone health is that it's contracting and shriveling up and then sagging every single day and then opening up again and looking fine the next day, and then contracting and sagging every single day and looking fine the next day, okay? And it'll have that horrible looking gaping mouth for a little while, but then it'll look fine. And a lot of people on the internet will tell you your anemone's fine. It's not fine. You have more than likely insufficient lighting, and you have temperature fluctuations. Okay? And these things are reacting with each other. Now see, your anemone's metabolism, the rate at which it processes a given amount of light, is determined by the temperature. Okay? So your anemone, if you're having a high temperature, low temperature spike, it's going to have a problem adjusting. And what's going to happen is it's going to have a bunch of zooxanthellae activity, and then it's going to get cold. And then that zooxanthellae is going to have kind of a toxifying effect on it. But it's not going to want to eject the zooxanthellae because there's enough light and because it's going to get warm the next day. So it winds up just kind of making itself get food poisoning, basically. And then every single night it's got to puke. Okay, that's what it's doing. Every single night it's puking because it knows if it doesn't puke now, it's going to get sick the next day. And for a while you'll see it before it even gets to that day and night cycle. It'll probably do it a couple times during the middle of the day. Now, if you see your anemone shrink up to its base and look protected, the base expands and the tentacles come inside the base, then your temperature is getting way too low at night. It usually only happens at night. If it happens during the day, then you probably got too cold temperature all around. But an anemone will eventually get that stressful, wasting, gaping mouth, even if the water conditions are just fine, because of that low temperature. And what that's doing is causing that similar effect, plus it's causing the anemone to be exposed to bacteria. And it's wanting to keep all of the water, all of everything out of itself to keep that bacteria that grows better in the colder temperatures from taking it over in the inside. And then the next day when the water warms up and there's less of that little bacteria cloud around it, it'll open up again. Mild increase in current, but might be helpful, but chances are it's just temperature. Any other questions y'all could think of about basic problems people have with anemones starting out? Or things you've read on the internet and you're wondering whether or not they're true? I'm going to start the long, arduous process of trying to get my television to turn back on. And we're going to wrap up this broadcast and get on the uncensored channel, or the unself-censored channel. See, this channel here has well over 1 million views counted on it. Those are mostly from the old content. I verified and have plenty of evidence to prove to anyone interested that YouTube has stolen at least 200,000 views from this channel. Just deleted them. And they continue to delete views from this channel. Every day. But the reason why they don't like me so much, and the reason why so much weird stuff is happening these days. That's all related, and it centers around what this channel used to be about. But I tried to acquiesce to their demands and make this channel a non-political channel and try to just focus on, you know, helpful advice, product reviews, that kind of thing, right? And then on my non-monetized channel, which I've had for a lot longer than this one, I have now, you know, that used to be my personal channel. That used to just be the Sean Morris channel. And I only had videos from my little UFO hunting in 2011 and the different things about reality falling apart back then, which is the real reason why everything's screwed up right now. And just so crazy right now. And you'd literally, as narcissistic as this sounds, I assure you this is a completely objective observation. To understand what is going on in this world right now, you have to become familiar with the content that I'm referring to. It used to be on this channel, now it's on the other one. In fact, in order to understand at least the past 2,000 years, you're going to need me. Otherwise, it's basically hopeless. And in continuance of my statement that it is not some sort of narcissistic delusion, let me just point out first and foremost that this is the last thing I ever wanted to happen to me, and it is a big pain in my ass. I would much rather just be breeding clownfish and, you know, living my life. But instead I happen to be the only person that can see this thing that's happening to all of the world. And the people that are helping it happen, well, they seem to be in control here. But anyways, I think my video the other day, if you didn't see it, the one with the Tropical Storm Gordon moving in, if you haven't watched that video, you need to watch that video to understand the basics about me. Because this right here is actually Merlin's wand. And it followed me into this lifetime from places that should not exist. And in that video the other day, I'm outside playing with a storm, and I asked people to not judge me based upon the spiritual aspects of my nature, and realize that I'm just trying to put forth tangible, educational, business-oriented, or otherwise logical solutions to all of mankind's problems. It's just what I do. Okay? And every step of the way, everything I've said on this channel has been proven true. Every warning I've given, every outrageous claim I've made has come to fruition. And in that video, which I can't pull it up on here because my TV's off, but it's on this channel, a couple days ago, I live streamed during the storm approaching, and my wife asked me to create a barrier. I wound up having a little too much fun creating the barrier and wound up smashing the entire storm to shit, but, you know, I've done that with tornadoes before on this channel. At the end of the video, I give a little lecture about how I would ask that you judge me separately based upon the merit of my business propositions and the logical solutions and designs and inventions that I put forward that are going to basically ensure that this planet continues to remain habitable and whatnot, rather than what I said was magical mumbo-jumbo. And as I said magical mumbo-jumbo, I waved the wand on this live stream right behind me, and lightning strikes right behind me. And then, after a few more moments of lecture, I say it's not about the magical mumbo-jumbo, leaning to the left as if the lightning was going to strike, just a tease, and then saying, notice, I didn't put the wand, I didn't use the wand this time. And then I flick the wand right behind me, and not only does the lightning strike again, the only 2 times during this entire speech, right when I flick my wand back there, but the lightning actually strikes from the wand's position. If you pause the video, you can see clearly the lightning pointing directly to the airspace behind the wand. But like I said, I'm not here to be judged based upon the whole magical mumbo-jumbo thing. The fact that I'm probably the most ancient anything there ever was is not the point. The point is, humanity's in grave danger. It needs to do some things to save themselves, and I'm just trying to tell them to do those things. They can choose whether or not to do those things, depending on how much they like breathing oxygen. But there have been many previous little lightning show exhibitions that I've done just to get the attention of the Russians and other people that were fucking with me. Including demonstration of my ability to ask the muses, or the first children, the first daughters of God and Goddess, also some of the most ancient souls in existence, to ask the muses to continue to elaborate on a point by creating a film or television series, and then I would snap my fingers on this very channel, and within months there's a new series coming out about that exact subject, and the exact things that I was talking about are covered, including Merlin being trapped in a tree, which I was for a very, 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 very long time. I put it at about 420 years because I know the exact years. But during the 1560s, Europe was basically falling, and my interference was no longer warranted or deserved. So I was asked to perform certain duties as a man, and I did those duties as a man. And if anybody was expecting any miracles from me at that time, they were sadly mistaken as to the results of their own actions. But we were being attacked by dirigibles, mortars, and flying ships, destroying entire cities in what we now call Austria. So I made the world's most foolish attempt to design fighter aircraft. And people think it's some big fancy thing, that is. I wish they'd decipher what I was talking about as far as the genetic abominations that empire that I was designing those flying machines to defend against were breeding and sending back to Europe, but nobody seems to want to talk about that. Anyways, I think I'm going beyond the new mandate of this channel. But anyways. Any more questions about the fish tank stuff? You see, one of the things that's been plaguing the Earth, that is basically going to put the civilization of mankind in jeopardy and whatnot, their very survival in jeopardy, is the cause of coral bleaching that people don't seem to understand very well. Even scientists, even biologists, I've been trying to get them to come to understand it more, and the Australians are starting to talk more about the ideas that I put forward, and I was hoping they would recognize me for this in some way. But I'm glad enough that they're at least getting on the right track. Because like I said, those undetectable dead zones, when you go and you test the water in one place, the water in another place might not have as high a quality. And the ocean is especially a place where this happens. If you're taking a sample anywhere near the surface, you're not going to get the phosphate and nitrate content of there down by the base rock, by the detritus. You need to go take a sample by the detritus. You need to go take a sample in the dead zone to understand what kinds of gentle waves of nitrate and phosphate concentration that those corals were exposed to before they bleached and all got covered in algae. Because it's only nitrate and phosphate concentration that makes a coral susceptible to temperature changes and magnesium fluctuations. A magnesium fluctuation will otherwise cause a coral to have a weaker skeleton structure, and it might be blown over during a storm, but it's not going to RTN unless the flesh and the skeleton are no longer fitting together, basically. And what happens is that amount of phosphate and nitrates that can be consumed by phytoplankton in the water before it gets to where you're testing from, that's coming out of the rocks and out of the dead zones and surrounding these corals in waves, not even all the time, and causing the brown zooxanthellae to bloom in deeper water than it should. Then, when the temperature increases, the brown zooxanthellae, which has a much higher metabolic exponential rate of increase, will overproduce, causing the flesh of that coral to expand. And it has two choices at that point: to eject all the zooxanthellae, if it can. Well, it's not really a choice. If it can, it'll do that. If it can't, if it doesn't have enough magnesium in its skeletal structure to have everything as strong as possible to where it can channel that and reroute it through each polyp, it's just going to RTN. All the flesh is just going to come flying off of it. Because what's going to happen is the zooxanthellae is going to go into these microscopic pores, and it's going to try to go out into these pathways, and then they're going to get clogged. Then they're not going to have anywhere to go. They're going to continue to breed, and then the flesh of the skeleton itself is going to pop like a balloon. It's going to burst from zooxanthellae overproduction on the inside. It's going to start tearing the cell wall membranes apart, or the overall, the superstructural membrane apart. So, it's never just temperature. It's never just magnesium. It's a combined factor of how these things relate to metabolism and the different ways that skeletal structure goes with flesh when it comes to magnesium content, and the difference between the types of zooxanthellae that grow under high phosphate and nitrate conditions and how they adversely over-metabolize when the temperature rises. So if you don't have these brown zooxanthellae, if you don't have these overproducing zooxanthellae in the coral from the little phosphate and nitrate waves, when the temperature rises, they might bleach a little bit, but they're not going to fully bleach. Chances are they're not going to do anything but fluoresce. And then they'll be fine once the temperature goes back down. But the problem that they weren't addressing for all these years, that I've been warning about, that could basically start killing off anybody who's obese or has asthma, or people who donated a lung or only have one lung. They won't be able to survive anymore. Humans won't be able to survive up in the mountains anymore in about 20 years. And in about 30 years, somebody my height isn't going to be able to survive. Only people about 5 foot tall and under are going to be able to survive. In about 50 years, you'll have midgets and mammals under 60 pounds. Large reptiles, large mammals, even some large birds will no longer be able to live. That is because of this thing called cyanobacteria and many other similar organisms that are poisoning large amounts of water right now. And as a fish hobbyist, you know what causes cyanobacteria: phosphates and nitrates. Now, what are we doing that's causing phosphates and nitrates to build up in that kind of a proportion in the ocean that it's not just getting naturally mitigated, right? Why isn't the ocean naturally? Well, we're doing two things. We're tearing up the coastlines, dredging up the bacteria beds of rivers that are supposed to be processing the biological waste of our farm and livestock production. We've failed to restore the grasslands and marshes and keep them with the proper amount of water flowing through. We think of them as like spillways and backup channels, and we don't understand that the polluted river water that we send into the ocean, it's a lot like the top-off water that I was sending into my tanks to get them looking this bad. In fact, my tanks still look better than the ocean right now. And my RODI system was shit. Well, our RODI system is shit. We have fucked up the nature's ocean top-off water. You know, nature's auto top-off. The rivers are pumping fertilizer, nitrate and phosphate, into the oceans. These are causing first zooxanthellae overproduction, then hair algae blooms, then phytoplankton blooms combined with the start of cyanobacteria on top of the algae. You know how like once the algae starts to grow and then like the water gets brown, then the algae isn't getting enough light, and then it starts to grow red over it. That's the cyanobacteria, right? And this will happen while the phytoplankton starts to bloom in the water. Okay? But then that'll all die out. And this cyanobacteria will find its way into all this dying, lovely nutrient phosphate that's dying off in the water from all this dead phytoplankton. It's going to start a big-ass red tide. There's two ways to keep this from happening. There's two things that have to be done to keep this from happening. One is you need mechanical augmentation. You need protein skimmers and calcium carbonate live rock beds in the brackish areas where the rivers meet the oceans. Okay? by the thousands. Okay? Just to make a dent, you need 112 of them per river mouth on average worldwide. Okay? But we have to do it. It's not even going to cost that much. These aren't expensive pieces of equipment. These aren't, it's a dock with some baskets in it. Baskets filled with rocks. Boulders if you can. Calcium carbonate. Okay? Then, you start planting more mangrove trees and seagrass in strategic bands that will help the natural grassland and natural filtration processes resume. Any straight channels that rivers are cut through for shipping purposes that avoid marsh outlets, we need to blow some holes in those channels and let the river water go where the damn river water's supposed to go. Because those grasslands are nature's refugium. Okay? We need seagrass, caulerpa, and mangrove trees, cultivated on land and strategically positioned on coasts, right now. Because we have spent the past 100 years digging that shit up and building resorts and power plants and chemical plants and all kinds of other crap. All while continuing to dump more and more of the very problem that natural process is meant to fix. So we need to have man-made solutions. We need to get protein skimmers to harvest up those brackish water blooms. We need to get protein skimmers to harvest up the excess nutrients upstream in the fresh water. We can take both and turn them into biodiesel, which I'm glad to see somebody's finally doing. They've been growing cyanobacteria and algae and turning that into biodiesel for years. Okay, but finally someone's talking about doing it in a way that actually cleans up the existing shit. But the fact of the matter is, that is a far-fetched prospect. As simple as it sounds, as great of a solution as it sounds, creating biodiesel from algae is never going to solve the problem. Frankly, the investment is too large. The number of people interested in producing it is too large. And there are too many other available sources for diesel. There's too many other available sources for energy. But you know what we can't drill out of the ground? You know what we can't build solar panels to replace? Food. We need to be channeling dirty water that already has the fertilizer in it into aquaponics facilities. Those aquaponics facilities can grow plants to grow fish, or they can just grow crops, or they can grow both. Now, if we're going to solve this phosphate and nitrate problem, we simply need to use the phosphate and nitrate. What it's meant for is to grow food. So we need to start this channel. Okay, the reason why I ask you to go and become at least a $7 subscriber on Patreon for me is because when I get enough of those, I'm going to start paying the remote and trying to get more subscribers. And I have a few people committed to, by the time they get the money to do it comfortably, they're going to be $420 a month investors. And that's going to give them a percentage of ownership of this company that's going to wind up buying every plot of shitty land along every river in the South I can get my hands on. And we're going to set up docks of these windproof, floodproof aquaponics facilities that grow the cleanest, healthiest fish you can eat, and also clean the water around them. So they're going to use that water just to make food for the fish, basically. And then they're going to use the water that the fish dirtied up to grow plants for food. I personally think catfish and tilapia poo would make a great tomato. So what this is all going to start with is, and like I've said on previous broadcasts, my fish store is going to be a self-sustaining fish store that breeds its own fish, okay? And it's also going to be an educational facility explaining everything that I've just explained, only with, exhibits and models and that kind of thing. Like visible experiments, side by side, one tank, pretty, one tank with Mississippi River water as its top-off water. Okay? That should be something to see, wouldn't it? Let's just tell people what they're actually doing to the ocean. And that's all going to be on this channel, by the way. That's all going to be streamed live. This pet store / educational facility is going to be the prototype for this building design, which is going to be the basis for all of these aquaponics facilities, because one of the primary things these buildings need to be designed for overall, in my vision, okay, is to withstand a hurricane. That is so these aquaponics facilities can be taken down to Cuba and Puerto Rico. And I'm talking about not just the ones that float on the docks. I'm talking about ones built on land, like my fish store is going to be built on land. It's going to be flood-proof, wind-proof, and hurricane-proof to a point. Okay? It's going to be able to absorb a lot of the shock from, up to a 5-pointer, and there's not going to be any major damage from on up to a 7-pointer. It's going to be able to just sit there and shake and take it. Cross between a foundation and suspension. And I'm a car guy. I build little race cars, and I'm friends with the real-time racing boys. And when I built this structure, when I designed this structure, the basic model of this structure, okay, all of these different versions of it are modular. They're designed to be constructed in interchangeable parts so they can be built efficiently on site and deployed and assembled quickly and bought cheaply, affordable, right? I first designed them during the tsunami events of 2011 in Japan. I binged watched all that footage, man. And I just... when Robin Williams is the android and he's like, "This will not do"? That's how I feel about it. This will not do. We need to build a better house overall. We need to have a better way of building houses for poor people and for rich people. And that's what I set out to design. And when I first started trying to pitch for investors, and I had the business plan underway, I was starting the business plan, there were 2 major floods in this area. And if people would have just had my flood-proof sheds right around the corner, they wouldn't have lost the fucking 67 Stingray. 427. Spent 15 years restoring it. Lost in a flood. If he would have just had one of my buildings, he'd still have that damn car. And he'd probably let me drive it, since I saved it. So, the idea is to set up this facility as a self-sustaining prototype. So, the fact that I'm building my own fish store in it is the funding mechanism to make this a zero-cost prototype. And because I'm not going to want my hands on this big real estate empire, because I'm going to want to be coordinating things in a much more hands-off fashion, so I can focus on expanding other aspects of the business and the charity. But I'm going to basically be putting a general contractor, a construction guy, in charge of the construction part of the business. And this is going to be the prototype. We're all going to be investors in it, you know. And these buildings range from a barn that can be indefinitely added to and expanded, that floats when it floods, to a luxury duplex beach house, you know, like 2 little 1-bedroom luxury beach condos that insurance companies are just going to have to face the fact that they can't make much money off of them. Because when a storm comes, it ain't going nowhere. They're designed like a cross between a pyramid and a lifeboat. And from there, while we're focusing on trying to set up a retail clientele for those buildings, we're also going to be seeking government grants to aid disaster relief versions of those buildings. In addition, I have designed several very clever, very low-cost and effective military applications to these buildings. Self-deploying sound like a fun option for a building? Self-deploying buildings? No waste. No engine that just sits there. Nope. All that's a kit. Gets removed. Move to the next one. Deploy more buildings with it. Self-deploying buildings. Be a hell of a good thing for a combat situation when you need a base, but you got to protect a construction crew. Okay? Instead, all you got to protect is the bulldozers that clear the area, and then your self-deploying buildings come in, link up, you take the hover kit out of them. Oh, did I give away a little bit too much for the hover kit? Anyways. It does boggle my mind how I can actually manage to get only 2 people watching me on this channel, you know? Like, considering I was the first person and the only person to really still to have discussed what exactly has happened in this country. The very nature of the divide and conquer and how long it's been going on against us. And, yeah. If anything, I come up with just way too many interesting, fun ideas. The real hobbits were black, and they built Stonehenge. No. No, like shit long before the channel, man. I should have been making a name for myself, but I failed to somehow. Like, solar-powered vents for a car when it's off. I emailed somebody at Honda, and they emailed me back, and they said that we don't accept submissions for ideas in public, but you can write a letter to this and this. And I'm like, I'm not writing a fucking letter. That requires just effort and shit. I've got the idea, it's a good idea. Here, I'm fucking giving you the idea, take the damn idea. Well, they didn't fucking do anything with it. They insulted me by not doing something with it. I love my Hondas, don't get me wrong. I forgive them for that. I'm just trying to explain why. The next day, I emailed it to Toyota. And they put them on the Prius. Good job, Toyota. Thanks for listening. That was back in the 90s. Now, when I finally got into actual cars, I built this little ram air induction system. It's a dual stage setup. And the principle was, these cold air intakes that you put behind your bumper and your wheel well are fucking stupid. And I thought I could build something better from $20 at Home Depot. And I was right. And I did. And I spent maybe $50 total on it, because I just kept on adding to it. But I had a crankcase diffuser for a big block, like a big Hemi-size one. Hollowed out the inlet on it because it was only like a half inch. I hollowed it out to about 1.25 inches. And I put that near where you'd have like a short ram intake. Okay? And I had on my 93 Integra this air filter box that had a hose that went up to the front in the middle of the front grill area, and it had a straightforward inlet like that, and it had kind of a slanted back to it, and then the air filter was horizontal on top of that. Well, I had this secondary air filter up here, okay, after this filter, so just kind of expanding the amount of filtration surface area, okay, giving me a little bit better off the line torque. The other hose on there, I rigged up to, in the front grille, right below the bumper, a ram air scoop that I called the gulper, because it just went like this, and then up into that hose, and then into that cold air box. And you know, people laughed at it until they raced me. Because what they didn't know was that in that cold air box, I had made, out of aluminum tape, some thrust vectoring vanes that took the shape of that cold air box. It was kind of shaped like the air came in on this side, and it curved up at the back. So I made a little slat there, a little slat there, a little slat there, so that the wind from that ram air, when it came in, would be sliced up and evenly divided among that air filter. And sure enough, when I pulled the air filter, it had like a little brown spot in front of each of the vanes where that compressed air had been shoved up evenly across the whole air filter, instead of all being rammed up into the corner in a high pressure zone and then having like a low pressure zone where it didn't really work out too well. And then on top of that, at the intake for that other little air filter I added, I made out of wax paper, aluminum tape, and duct tape a sealing what I called the sail flap. So when the air came in and went in the air filter, it pushed up. And I had just like a little bitty flag kind of thing on the end of it, to where anytime I was pulling vacuum, it wouldn't be restricting, it would flutter up, right? But when the ram air came on, it would shut off that other filter, so that the pressure from the ram air wouldn't get lost, and I would get between 1.5 and 3 psi, depending on how fast I was going, into my intake manifold. And I got a 5-bar map sensor and some gauges and fuel pressure regulator, and did some tuning, and that little 1.6 liter B16A VTEC from an XSI Integra direct engine swap. Oh, a rare, lovely little model in Japan. Had 170 horsepower to start with, and came with an LSD automatic, which you could only get in that 93 year, and then again in 96 in an Accord. The Accord automatic Euro. It's Euro S? Yeah, Euro S. Automatic with a fucking LSD transmission. And the motor I have that I got in the Accord right now, I don't know whether it has it or not. I don't know how to tell in an H series. But it came from that car. It came from the car that has it as an option. Okay, or had it as an option back in 96. Mine came from the Accord Euro 96. And that's in my 93 Accord, which is about 200 pounds less. Anyways. So, that little secondary air filter would get shut off, okay? And to give you an idea of how well shut off it got and how much air pressure was building up in there were 3 different times I had to reinforce the flap because it was getting sucked up into that little tiny air filter. Because as the ram air started, it would blow so hard it would just... And I had to pull it out and reinforce it and make the center of the flap stronger so it would hold a seal. And if that car didn't do lower 13s, upper 12s, I'd be shocked. It had all the power of any what do you call it, individual throttle body built all motor cars. Not as much power as a turbo car. But the off-the-line speed of that car for a 1.6 liter was fucking phenomenal. I'd rev it up in neutral and slam it into second to take off. And it would land about 3,500 RPM. By the time the tires would light up, just a little bit, and then they would come back to grip at about 3,500 RPM. It just took a split second to get back into VTEC. And then third, and then by the time I was almost into fourth, doing well over 97 miles an hour. I think the third gear on that car probably went up to about 120 if you wanted to redline it. For an automatic transmission, that thing was just fun as hell. I got it up to 144, which was the limit of the tires. I'm not going to go past the limit of the tire recommendation, But it was at 6,800 RPM at 144 miles per hour. and the red line was 8,200. So it had a ways to go. It probably would have made it to 160 if I had the right tires on it. The BMWs that they used to make in the 90s for the Nürburgring, for the Autobahn, actually went slower than those Honda VTEC models. Those Honda VTEC models were geared to go 163 miles an hour, and those 6-cylinder Beamers would only do 155. Your STIs and Evos, they would only do 144. Part of the reason why the Honda got such good gas mileage was one of the reasons why it didn't accelerate so well, that long gearing. But the VTEC just let it keep going, man. Just keep going. So anyways, I think we've talked about cars too long. Mr. Conway, thanks for joining me. I'm about to go ahead and call this a broadcast and go ahead and hop on the other channel in a few minutes. I'm going to need a break first, but it shouldn't take me too long. Right now, we were talking about anemones, and we've kind of sidetracked into a few other subjects here. But it's been fun. Thanks to Mr. Relic Turtle. I always welcome new people hanging out. It's good to see you again. I know you've been on the broadcast a couple times. I appreciate the chat and conversation. It certainly helps me come up with, more insightful crap to pull out of my ass or my head or whatever. Yeah. But anyways, yeah. One thing I will tell you, man, is that what's gotten me to the point of pining over the inventions to being pissed off about them not being in motion right now is the fact that I focused long and hard on planning this out in a way that cuts costs and maximizes profits, to where it's not only something that's going to save the world and save a lot of lives, but as far as a business proposition, it's just foolproof. And I've put great efforts into the efficiency of the materials acquisition process, the deployment process, everything. It's all basically planned out from a starting point. And it's, there's going to be more plans to be made to where it can expand from there. But this, what was it, 57-page business plan that has now been made available to a couple of investors and grantors. It spells out the starting point. It's written up with basically materials all at retail costs and with very conservative, not ambitious at all retail prices on everything. So and especially the sales numbers, like the amount of sales that I'm projecting are probably minuscule compared to the amount of sales that we're going to get. So the profit is going to be a lot greater than what I have planned out. The costs are going to be a lot lower than what I have planned out. And what I have planned out already works and is already a significant return on investment. So when it winds up working out better, it's just going to be a bigger return on investment, right? And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it to where even if things go bad, it still comes out green, But anyways, please check out, if you want to see some examples of the inventions that are available, there's a couple that are posted on the Easy Reefers Facebook page, and some more that are available to people who want to pitch in at Easy Reefers on Patreon. That's patreon.com/EasyReefers. But anyways, we'll be on to the Lost Begotten channel in about 10-20 minutes. I appreciate it if y'all join me there. And thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Please share the link. Share the love. Don't forget to click that like button, or buction, whichever you prefer. And make sure you're subscribed. Click the dingy little bell for notifications so you'll get notified of future broadcasts and uploads, and it might actually work. Maybe. Anyways, y'all take it easy, don't take it all. Peace. That's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. This is the right one.
Bye.